Spartan voices speaking out tonight. Plus, the U.S. Coast Guard plans a new search in the Bahamas for a missing Michigan woman. News 10 at 11 starts now.
First alert weather and live local coverage. This is News 10.
I think he had the potential to be the best Michigan State president in modern history.
Shock and disappointment tonight from people in the Spartan community as Michigan State University loses its 7th president in just 8 years. After just 2 years, Kevin Guskowitz announced he's leaving. Good evening. I'm Ann Emmerich. The president turned down a raise of almost $1 million. It would have nearly doubled his salary and made him one of the highest paid university presidents in the country. Instead, he is taking a lower paid position with Clemson University in South Carolina. In a letter published this morning, Guskowitz cited conflicts with the MSU Board of Trustees, including differing perspectives and internal conflicts. He also accused some trustees of abusing their access to privileged information to further their own personal agendas. Today, News 10 asked Guskowitz about the offer for a higher salary and a recent contentious meeting of the board.
Let me just say this. I very much appreciated the board wanting to continuing to support me in this way. There had been conversations for several months about the possibility of an extension and a salary increase. I want to be clear, I never asked that. And yes, I know that meeting was a two-part meeting, and yeah, I think you saw some of what came from it around disagreements around code of ethics and what the role of the board should be with respect to relitigating some of the issues of the past.
And tonight, reaction is pouring in from some of the state's most prominent Spartan voices. Former governors, university supporters, and political leaders are raising questions about what this means for MSU and its future. News 10's Rachel Fulton joins us live in studio with that angle tonight.
Good evening, Ann. Many of the people I spoke with today say their concern goes beyond just losing one president. Several described Kevin Guskowitz as a leader who helped restore confidence in MSU. Now they are questioning what this latest departure signals for bringing in another high-profile leader.
I think he's been one of the best leaders Michigan State has had in a generation.
Michigan State University is once again searching for its next president. Now longtime Spartan leaders warn the turnover is becoming part of the problem. Truscott Rossman CEO John Truscott says outgoing MSU President Kevin Guskowitz brought stability to a university that has spent years working through controversy and has now gone through 7 presidents in just 8 years.
You cannot have a stable institution when your leadership turns over that frequently. President Guskowitz had MSU on the right path. He had a lot of things going.
As the search for a new leader begins again, criticism of the Board of Trustees is growing louder.
Certain board members that are in it for themselves and not the university. And you as a board member, you have a fiduciary responsibility, you have an ethical responsibility. Those are not being lived up to.
Former Governor Jim Blanchard says the bigger concern now is whether the university can attract another nationally recognized candidate.
It's going to be very difficult to recruit someone to become president of Michigan State until there's a board of competent people who can work together, which is why we're trying to get the board process changed right away before the legislature.
That effort would change how trustees at Michigan State University, the University of Michigan, and Wayne State University are selected, shifting from elected positions to gubernatorial appointments.
The system failed, and we have to change the system.
Former Governor John Engler, who also served as MSU's interim president in 2018, says the concerns surrounding board infighting are not new, but now they are the center of what happens next.
No president of the quality we deserve and would seek to hire will ever allow their name to be considered by this board. They simply will not look at Michigan State.
Governor Gretchen Whitmer also commented on the matter, saying this is disappointing, but also nobody should be surprised by this outcome, given some of the antics we've seen from a handful of board members. She said the way board members are selected for all Michigan universities needs to change. And while much of the criticism tonight has been directed at the board, trustee Rima Vassar pushed back in a statement to WKAR News. In part, she said a little over a week ago, President Guskowitz told me personally that he wanted to stay at Michigan State University. Vassar also pointed to the board's recent vote to increase his salary, saying the decision to leave came days later. Guskiewicz now heads to lead Clemson University. He is expected to make about $1.2 million, just above what Michigan State University was paying him now.
Rachel, thank you. We continue our team coverage tonight.